Gardening became more enjoyable and a whole lot more exciting for me when I gave up trying to figure out how to feed my plants. And despite what a lot of garden experts will tell you, plants hardly need to be fed by you. As the gardener, your job is to actually feed the soil, and more specifically the soil biology. And by the way, welcome back to the channel if you're new here. I'm Taylor, and the overarching topic and theme of this channel in a lot of ways is biology, which is crazy because in high school, biology was genuinely my worst subject. However, now that I sense that some of its practical relevance to my life as a gardener and a wannabe farmer, I spent a lot of time reading, researching, and formulating my thoughts on the subject. And if you'd like a few of those thoughts sent your way every once in a while, you can sign up for my email newsletter. I'll send you ideas and solutions for practical soil building techniques you can try throughout the year. But if you're struggling getting on board with this idea of letting go of plant foods, let me tell you, I understand. In fact, not so long ago, I was curious about plant foods. I have memories of my grandma's gardening shelf littered with plant-specific fertilizers for all of her different flowers and veggies. And so I thought for a while that those are what you needed to buy in order to start a garden. And in fact, that was a bit of a turnoff for me from gardening for some reason. It kind of all felt a bit confusing, not to mention expensive. And I can't really blame my past self. If you look at plant fertilizers, there are two things that they all have in common. They contain the same ingredients, and they all contain different amounts of those ingredients. So maybe that means that they actually have one thing in common. Why would plant foods all contain different amounts of the same nutrients? All of which claim that they've tested and verified their exact formula to know which works best. Think about how concerning that would be for something like your car. What if there were just all sorts of different types of fuels that you could choose from with no real way of knowing which would work for your vehicle and which would ruin your vehicle? I guess this year I'll try diesel, and maybe next year we go with unleaded gasoline, and then next time maybe I'll just try going without it. And I hear you saying that biology is a bit more complex of a topic than motor vehicles, but we do this with supplements for human health, by the way. What makes this multivitamin better than that one when they're both tested and approved by experts? I'm personally convinced that plant foods, organic or otherwise, are 95% branding and 5% generalized plant nutrition that is obviously going to help. What I think a lot of gardeners get hung up on is when they look at the specific nutrients and quantities of those nutrients in their soil based on each individual plant's needs. It creates a very rigid and compartmentalized way of growing. But I've been speaking in generalities here, and I haven't really gotten much into the specifics. Many of you will not be shocked to hear that I much prefer the idea of cultivating the biological conditions of the soil, rather than the chemical or the nutritional conditions. But why is that? What does biology do? Well, take a sec and imagine your favorite restaurant, going there and ordering your favorite meal. Now imagine they bring you your meal, and it's just the raw ingredients, unprepared, not cooked, nothing. It would be pretty hard to eat. Now imagine you order your favorite meal and they instead bring you a nutrient water solution that contains all of the components of the meal without any of the food. This analogy doesn't work perfectly, but getting the raw ingredients unprepared is sort of like what would happen if you brought in sterile store-bought compost and filled a raised bed with it and then tried to plant into it. The nutrients would be there, but not necessarily in forms that the plant could consume. Some, but mostly not. Plants don't eat compost. And then on the flip side, getting the nutrient water version of your meal is kind of like what happens when we add chemical fertilizers to our garden soil to feed our plants. It technically gives them the nutrients that they need, but there are a lot of missing pieces. In this strange sort of image, the restaurant is the soil. The workers, cooks, waiters, dishwashers, everyone are the microorganisms in the soil, and the customer is the plant. Without cooks, the food doesn't get prepared for consumption. Without waiters, the food never gets delivered. Without dishwashers and janitors, the restaurant gets dirty and starts creating an unsafe food prep environment that eventually will get the customers sick. And without the customers, the restaurant workers don't get paid. They're out of work. And as much as this is a very simplified version of how the plant soil food web dynamic works, it helps us actually understand what happens when we try feeding plants rather than feeding the soil. The plant feeding mindset puts microorganisms out of work. The soil feeding mindset puts them to work. Now, if we can grow plants without first feeding the microbes, Aren't we just eliminating a step? Seems like extra work for nothing, but it's not nothing. First off, we gotta ask about the nutrients in a given fertilizer. Why do some plants get more nitrogen and less potassium? Which plants need a lot of calcium and which need a higher than average amount of magnesium? Trying to sort all this out, for me at least, is pretty exhausting. But again, luckily, we have experts who have tested and decided which solutions or combinations of organic compounds work for each and every plant known to man. Also, again, why do none of them agree? Let's just compare these two fertilizers for blueberries. Everyone knows that blueberries enjoy acidic soil, so this one looks good. Down to earth, all natural fertilizers, organic acid mix. This one works for blueberries, raspberries, azaleas, and rhododendrons. The NPK ratio is 4:3:6, 4% nitrogen, 3% phosphorus, 6% potassium. Great. Let's take a look at another one. Should look pretty similar. This one comes to us from Garden Wise, acid-loving plants, azaleas, rhododendrons, and blueberries. NPK comes in at 8:4:8. I genuinely want to know, why is one a 4:3:6 mix and another one an 8:4:8 mix? Well, maybe the other nutrients are more consistent. Down to Earth says 3% calcium, 2% magnesium, 2% sulfur. Let's check out Garden Wise. It says we got 1.2% magnesium, also 1% boron, no more than 6% chloride, 1.3% iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. Now you gotta wonder who's right here, and how does the other company not know? Well, in the words of Adrian Monk, here's the thing. You can use these fertilizers to grow blueberries and azaleas, and they'll probably both work. But it's not because either of them cracked some sort of secret code. For the down-to-earth organic fertilizer, that's because the microorganisms are going to get to work preparing the meal from the ingredients that you stocked the pantry with, and then they'll decide how much of each nutrient the plant needs. For the garden-wise synthetic fertilizer, it's because plants are going to take what they can get, and the microbes won't have much to do. The difference is how the microbes are treated. When microbes break down organic matter into bioavailable nutrients, they exchange those nutrients for root exudates from the plant. When there's no need to break down and deliver nutrients to the plants, they don't get as many exudates. And when that happens, microbes in the soil atrophy and the populations atrophy and slowly dwindle in population and strength, which means that the cleanliness of the environment starts going out the window, leaving the door open for pathogens. When nutrients are all right there within roots' reach for the plant, it means that they don't need to extend roots very deep. And with shallow root systems, plants become less resilient. They require more watering, and they lack the structural support and stability, and they store less carbon in the soil. And there's so many things that don't happen when microbial populations reduce in the soil, and so many amazing beneficial things that happen when they're present in really large amounts. And that's why the added step, feeding soil biology, so that the biology can feed the plants, is so necessary. Now, all that being said, you can go ahead and use organic fertilizers for your plants. You can use synthetic fertilizers for your plants. But in my opinion, the most cost-effective and sustainable approach comes when we stick to fertilizers that don't come in a package. And the good news is there are virtually endless options. Everything is kind of a fertilizer if you stretch the definition. Everything that can decompose on the soil. And notice that I said on. Yes, organic matter does decompose in the soil as well, but with a few important exceptions. For the most part, you want the microorganisms in the soil to be the ones that bring organic matter into the soil. As the gardener who's feeding the soil, you just need to place organic matter on the top, and the biology will actually do the work to integrate into the lower layers. Now, for the sake of this video, I want to keep this application principle really precise. We're not going to talk about adding extra microbe brews or teas to the soil. In this video, I want to sing the praises of a good organic mulch. Reason being, microbes are in the soil already. I'm of the belief that more microbes often means better. I see microbes as a fertilizer replacement of sorts, with some nuance there, but all soil contains microorganisms at some level, and just adding organic matter to the soil is going to feed them and help them multiply. Now, generally speaking, carbon-rich materials are going to feed the fungi in our soil. Again, there's more to it than just that, but for the sake of keeping it simple here, carbon feeds fungi, and these are your dried leaves, your straw, your dried grass clippings, your wood chips, all of which will decompose at varying speeds. They will, however, decompose more slowly than the nitrogen-rich materials, which happen to be better food for fast-acting bacteria. You might think about fungi and bacteria as the tortoise and the hare here. Fungi are slow-moving, slow-growing, but slow and steady wins the race. Bacteria are fast to grow and fast to die off. Both play an absolutely essential role in soil health. The reason I bring this up here is because super woody carbon materials will take a bit longer to build the organic matter and nutrient bank in your soil when compared to nitrogens. Going for something that accomplishes a bit of both is never a bad idea. So spreading some aged manure and then straw over the top could be a great combo. Manure breaks down fairly quickly, feeding fast-acting soil microbes, and straw will stick around a bit longer, giving your fungi a bone to gnaw on. Compost is pretty elite when it comes to a mulch material, and it's the one that I try to use the most. Homemade compost is going to contain a healthy balance of materials and is already well on its way to becoming soil-like. Point is, whatever you use, at some point or another, the microorganisms in your soil will decompose the materials, break them down into plant-available nutrients, and then exchange those nutrients with the plant. You can take out a lot of the guesswork, turns out, when you stop guessing, and instead let the microbes do the work. Now, I kept this action step very limited on purpose. Adding a single mulch to your soil is not going to magically fix everything. Otherwise, we wouldn't really have much to talk about on this channel. But to wrap up this video, let me encourage you to take this simple step if you're not already, and to choose a mulch to cover your soil with this season. If you'd like to go a bit more in depth and you get the sense that your soil needs a bit more of a thorough amendment, we've got a really in-depth deep dive of many of the ways that you can use homemade soil amendments to address issues in the soil. Check out that video if that sounds like something that would be helpful. And thanks as always for watching. I'll see you in the next one.